Morning I learned I was a wealthy woman. I drove clear across the Metroplex to tell my husband, and I ended up standing in the hallway outside his office, listening to him plan my funeral. Not the kind with flowers and a casket. The other kind. The financial kind, where a man buries his wife of 38 years quietly enough that she never feels the dirt going in. It started so ordinary I almost didn't pick up the phone. I was at the kitchen counter wiping up where the coffee maker always dribbles, and the landman's number came up on the screen. We've been going back and forth for 2 years about my mother's place outside of Sweetwater, 640 acres of mesquite in Caliche and good west wind that nobody in the family ever thought was worth a nickel. The solar company had been sniffing around the whole county. I figured he was calling to tell me the deal had fallen through again. Instead, he said the words closed and wired, and then a number with a comma in a place I'd never had a comma before. A little over $6 million. He had to say it twice because I made him. I sat down right there on the kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher, the way you do when your knees just quit on you. My mother had scrimped her whole life. She reused aluminum foil. She kept rubber bands on a doorknob. And all that time, she'd been sitting on land that the future wanted. I cried a little, and I laughed a little, and then the only thought in my head was the same one I'd had on every good day for 38 years. I have to go tell him. That was the woman I was that morning. The kind who, the second something wonderful happened, ran toward her husband with it cupped in her two hands like water. I grabbed my purse. I didn't even change out of my house shoes, just slid into the canvas flats by the garage door. His storm restoration company had its office out in a business park off the tollway, and I made the drive in 35 minutes flat, rehearsing how I'd say it. I pictured his face. I pictured him standing up from his desk so fast the chair rolled back and hit the wall, the way it used to when our daughter called to say she'd gotten into nursing school. I pictured us going to dinner somewhere with cloth napkins. I am embarrassed now at how happy I was. Embarrassed the way you are remembering yourself young and trusting and dumb. The girl at the front desk was new, and she didn't know me, which is the only reason I got as far as I did. I told her I was here to surprise my husband, and she just smiled and waved me back like I was bringing donuts. The hallway to his office had that gray office carpet that swallows your footsteps. His door was open a hand's width, and before I could push it, I heard the woman who ran his front office. I'll call her by what she was to me then, which is the woman I'd had to my own table at Thanksgiving. I heard her laugh low in her throat and say, "You really think she'll just sign it?" And I heard my husband say, "Honey, she'll sign anything I put in front of her. She thinks the company's drowning. She's been clipping coupons for me out of guilt for a month." I want you to understand that I did not move. 38 years teaches you a man's voice the way it teaches you the sound of your own furnace kicking on. And that was his voice, but warm and slick, in a register I had never once heard pointed at me. I stood there with the deed money still warm in some account I hadn't even seen yet, and I listened to my husband call me deadweight. He said it just like that. Once the deadweight's gone, the cash flow's clean. He said the business was clearing better than ever, that the new builds were a gold mine, and that he'd already moved the real numbers over to keep them out of any settlement. He said his wife wouldn't know a profit and loss statement from a grocery list. Then he said the thing that turned me to iron. He said, "She gave me the best years of nothing. I'm not handing her 30 cents. There was the rustle of clothes and a sound I will not describe except to say I knew exactly what it was, the way you know your own kitchen in the dark. A younger me would have shoved that door open and screamed the paint off the walls. I felt the scream rise up out of my chest, and then I swear to you, something in me went very cold and very quiet and very still, the way a pond does the first hard night of winter. I thought perfectly clearly, if I open that door, I lose. I become the wronged old woman they laugh about over wine. I get nothing and I learn nothing. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I backed up. One slow step, then another, my own house shoes silent on that ugly carpet, until I was past the door and around the corner. The new girl looked up. I made my mouth smile. "I forgot something in the car," I told her. "Don't tell him I came by. I want it to be a surprise." She grinned. She had no idea she was watching a marriage end. I walked out into the parking lot, got in my car, shut the door, and sat there in the heat with my hands at 10 and 2 like I was waiting for a light to change. I did not cry until I was on the access road. Then it came all at once, ugly and loud, the kind of crying that scares you a little because you don't know if it's going to stop. I cried for the casseroles I'd carried to his men when the company was young. I cried for the years I'd reused his coffee grounds and told myself it was helping. I cried for our daughter, asleep down the hall through all the nights I'd waited up for his headlights. Mostly I cried because the man I'd loved was real and the marriage was not, and you cannot grieve only half of that. But here is the strange grace of being 63 instead of 33. By the time I got to my own driveway, I was done. I'd already done my crying for the year, somewhere around the Walmart exit. What was left in me wasn't heartbreak anymore, it was arithmetic. I sat in my driveway and I made myself think it through like a problem on a chalkboard. He thought I was broke. Good. He thought I was simple. Better. He had no idea about the land I'd kept that quiet for 2 years because he'd always treated my mother's place like a punchline, and some old protective instinct had told me to hold it close. He'd already moved his real money somewhere I couldn't see. He'd already lied to me about the company drowning. The only mistake I could make now was letting him know that I knew. So I decided I would know everything and say nothing. I would be the simplest, sweetest, most oblivious old fool a cheating man ever underestimated. And I would not spend my last good years on revenge for the sake of meanness. I'd spend them on the truth, on dragging it up out of his fancy office and laying it on a table where everyone could see what kind of man builds a fortune by lying to the woman who darned his socks. The first thing I did before I let myself feel one more thing was protect the money. That same afternoon, I called a lawyer not his. God, no, but a woman a friend from church had used when her own marriage came apart. Her name was Ms. Reyes, and she had a way of listening that made me feel like I'd been doing all my own thinking with mittens on. I told her about the land sale, and she told me something that steadied my whole body. In Texas, an inheritance is yours alone. My mother's land, and every dollar it became, was separate property. As long as I never poured it into anything we owned together, he could not touch a penny of it, no matter what he hid or what he claimed. So we kept it clean. The wire went into a brand new account at a bank he'd never used, in my name only. I didn't tell my daughter the amount. I just told her I'd sold Grandma's place and asked her to help me get a few things in order, and that her father and I were having a hard stretch. She's a nurse. She knows when not to push. I set up a small trust. I got copies of everything that proved exactly when the land sold and exactly where the money came from, dated and notarized, because I am my mother's child and I keep my receipts. Then I drove home, took the chicken out to thaw, and made my husband his supper. I want to tell you that the next part was satisfying, and it was, eventually, but living it was the loneliest thing I've ever done. Because for the next several months I had to love a man I despised. I had to hand him his plate. I had to listen, with my face arranged into worry, while he sat across from me at our own table and ran his con on me to my face. It happened maybe a week later. He came home with his shoulders down and his sigh out ahead of him like a man wading through grief. "I've got to be straight with you," he said. He told me the company was in trouble, big jobs falling through, a supplier that left him holding the bag, the bank tightening up. He said the word bankruptcy the way you'd lay a dead bird on the table. And then this is the part that nearly broke my self-control. He reached across and took my hand and said, I might need to dip into anything we've got set aside. Do we still have that little bit in the savings? He was fishing. He wanted to know what I had, so he'd know what to take. And the old me, the real me, the woman who'd have done anything to help him, almost answered honest out of pure muscle memory. Instead, I let my chin tremble and I said, Oh, honey, there's hardly anything. I had to put it toward the new roof and the dental work. I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful. I watched it move across his face relief and then something uglier, something that looked almost like contempt for how easy I was. He squeezed my hand and called me a good girl. I went to bed that night and lay next to him listening to him breathe, and I have never in my life felt so far from another human being who was 18 inches away. Now, you don't bring down a man like my husband with feelings. You bring him down with paper. And the paper I needed was the real set of books, the numbers he'd bragged to that woman about hiding. I knew they existed. I just had to put my hands on them, and I am a 63-year-old housewife, not a private eye. But every man has people he's been careless with, and my husband had been careless with his bookkeeper for years. I'll call her Maeve. She was about my age, a stout, sharp-eyed woman who'd kept his books since before he had 2 trucks. He treated her like furniture, worse than furniture. He'd hired that younger woman over her and given the girl a fancy title and a raise, while Maeve did all the actual work, and I knew, because I'd sat next to Maeve at the company Christmas party for 15 years, that she had a long memory and a longer fuse. I started small. I'd happen by the office with a foil-covered plate. I made too much. Take some home, and I always made sure Maeve got hers first. I asked about her grandbabies by name. One afternoon, I caught her out in the parking lot, loading her car, and I let myself look as tired and beaten down as I felt. And she looked at me a beat too long and said, You holding up okay, hon? And I said, Some days. And she said, Lo, he doesn't deserve you. Never has. That was the door, and we both knew it, and neither one of us walked through it yet. I took my time. You don't rush a thing like that. I let her see me get treated badly. It wasn't hard to arrange. I just had to show up while that woman was in the office and watch her wave me toward the lobby like a delivery. I let Maeve watch my face while it happened. And then one evening I called her at home on a number she'd written in a church directory years back, and I just told her the truth. I told her what I'd heard at the door. I told her I wasn't crazy and I wasn't fishing. I knew about the second set of books. I knew about the money he'd moved, and I wasn't asking her to do anything wrong. I was asking her to help me protect myself before a man robbed me in a courtroom. There was a long silence. Then she said, I've been waiting 11 years for somebody to ask me that. It turned out my husband had built his whole shine on rot. He'd been padding insurance claims after every hailstorm for a decade, billing for roofs that didn't need replacing, splitting the difference with adjusters he'd gotten cozy with, taking cash he never reported. He'd set up a separate company in his brother's name, some shell with a bird in the title, and funneled the real profits through it. On paper, the storm restoration business looked like it was barely keeping the lights on. In the world, it was clearing more than $1 million a year, every dollar of it lying about, where it came from and how much it was. Maeve had every bit of it. She'd kept it for years, the way you keep the receipts for a return you're not sure you'll make. We almost got caught once. I'd come by to drop off her plate and she meant to slip me a thumb drive in the foil, and just as it was changing hands, my husband's office door opened and that woman walked out with her phone to her ear. I felt my whole chest seize. Maeve, cool as January, said too loud, And you tell your daughter the cobbler recipe's a family secret. I'm not giving it up that easy, and laughed, And I laughed, and the woman rolled her eyes at the two old hens and walked on by. The drive was already in my pocket. I drove home with both hands shaking on the wheel and the radio off, and I sat in my garage for 10 minutes before I trusted my legs. I had it all now, so I let him win. The divorce papers came on a Tuesday. He didn't even hand them to me himself. He had a man come to the door. The petition told a sad little story. The marriage was beyond repair. The family business was insolvent. There were debts. There were no real assets to divide. He offered me the car and a number that wouldn't have covered 2 years of property taxes, and his lawyer's letter all but patted me on the head about how generous it was considering he'd timed it so I'd panic. He figured I'd sign fast and grateful, the way I'd signed everything for 38 years. I let Ms. Reyes do the talking, and I let myself look exactly as defeated as he wanted. I disclosed my separate property properly. You do not lie to a court, not ever. That was his game, and not mine, but the land money sat in its own clean account with its own clean paper trail, untouchable, and he never thought to wonder why his broke, simple wife was so calm. He thought I was beaten. I let him. I'd quietly used my own money to put a deposit on a little brick house near my daughter, in my name, and I'd started moving my mother's good dishes out a box at a time when he was at the office with that woman. The day the divorce was final, he stood on the courthouse steps in a suit I didn't recognize, and he didn't say one word to me, just got in a car with her and drove off to celebrate getting rid of the dead weight. He thought that was the ending. It was barely the middle. Because somewhere in those quiet months, while I was carrying foil plates and crying in my garage, I'd gone looking for a man named Curtis. My husband used to mention him after his third beer. Curtis, the partner he'd had to push out back when the company was young. The way my husband told it, Curtis couldn't hack the business side. The way the truth turned out, Curtis was the one who actually knew how to put a roof on a house, and my husband had cooked the early books to make their company look like it was failing, scared Curtis into signing his share away for almost nothing, and walked off with the whole thing while Curtis ate the fake debt. It sounded so familiar it made my skin crawl. I wasn't his first victim. I was just the longest-running one. I found Curtis running a two-man crew out of a metal building on the wrong side of the highway, a good man with cracked hands and a tired wife who'd nearly left him, drowning in the kind of debt my husband had built for him on purpose. I didn't dress fancy when I went to see him. I just sat across from him at a card table in that hot building, and I told him who I was and what my husband had done to me, and I watched his jaw work. Then I asked him a question. You still know how to run roofs better than he ever did. He said he could do it in his sleep, that the only thing he'd ever lacked was the money and the stomach to start over. Then let's start over, I said, both of us. I put up the money to launch a new company. We named it True North. Curtis picked it, said he wanted to wake up every morning to a sign that meant the opposite of the man who ruined him. He took the lion's share of the ownership and ran every bit of it. I was the silent partner, the investor nobody ever saw, 80% of the money and 0% of the spotlight. I didn't want my name anywhere near it, not yet. I wanted Curtis to have his name back. And I told him exactly what I expected from my investment. An honest company, run straight, that did the work right and build it right and build it right, and that took back every storm-chasing client my husband had ever lied to. It didn't take a fortune, no matter what anyone tells you about how these things go. Roofing isn't pharmaceuticals. It takes good crews, fair prices, honest insurance work, and a man people trust standing out front. We poached his best foreman in the first 2 months. They were sick of him, it turned out, and a fair boss is a powerful thing. We undercut his padded claims with honest ones and let the adjusters who weren't on the take figure out the difference. By the time the next hail season rolled through North Texas, True North had the trucks lined up 3 deep in neighborhoods that used to be his, and my husband was watching his gold mine bleed out and had no idea the woman bleeding it was the one he'd called 30 cents of nothing. He came after me, of course. Greedy men always do. About 8 months after the divorce, when his business was cratering and he'd surely figured out somebody with money was hunting him, he found out about the land. I don't know how small towns talk, but he found out his broke ex-wife had sold her mother's place for millions, and the same lawyer who'd let me leave with the car came roaring back claiming I'd concealed assets, that the land money was really marital, that I'd defrauded him in the divorce. He took it to the press too, the local kind, played the wronged husband whose cold wife had hidden a fortune and walked away. For about a week, I was the villain in a story he wrote. I let him file. I wanted him to. The hearing was in a courtroom with bad fluorescent light and a flag in the corner, and he showed up in that nice suit with that woman 2 rows back, and his lawyer stood up and told the judge a tale about a conniving wife and hidden millions. He had the closing documents from the land sale. He thought he had me. Then it was my turn, and my lawyer asked the court's permission, and we put the dates up on the screen for everyone to read. The land sold from my mother's estate. Separate property under Texas law, mine alone, disclosed properly, never commingled, every dollar accounted for and dated. His whole concealment collapsed in about 90 seconds because there was nothing concealed. It had been his own arrogance that never bothered to look. His lawyer sat back down. But I wasn't there for 90 seconds. Your Honor, I said, and I stood up myself, the way my mother stood up in church. He says I'm the one who hid money. I'd like to show the court who actually has 2 sets of books. And we put up the real numbers. Every padded claim, every dollar of cash that never saw a tax form, the shell company in his brother's name, the bird in the title, the million plus a year he'd sworn under oath in our divorce did not exist. His lawyer shot off shouting that it was obtained illegally, and I just looked at him and said, "It was given to me by an honest woman he treated like furniture." My husband's face went the color of old paper. And then I asked the court's permission for one more thing, and I played them 10 seconds of audio I'd recorded, standing in that hallway in my house, Shoes' voice, warm and slick, saying he'd move the real numbers to keep them out of any settlement, and that he wasn't handing his wife 30 cents. His own voice in his own words in a room full of strangers. That woman in the 2nd row got very busy with her phone. He'd come to take my mother's money. He left in handcuffs. Because the last thing I told that courtroom, in the steadiest voice I have ever owned, was that copies of everything, every claim, every cooked book, every unreported dollar had already gone to the IRS and to the state insurance fraud unit weeks before. 2 men I hadn't met yet stood up from the back of the room. They were very polite about it. They asked my husband to come with them regarding a matter of insurance fraud and tax evasion, and they put the cuffs on right there in front of the press he'd invited himself. He was convicted the following year, fraud and tax evasion both, a long enough sentence that he'll be an old man when it's done. His brother lost the house the shell company sat under. That woman did not wait around. I went to see him exactly once, near the end, behind a glass with a phone you have to hold to your ear. He looked smaller. He asked if I'd come to gloat. I told him no. I'd come to tell him one true thing. Because I'd spent 38 years being lied to, and I wanted to walk out clean. I told him he hadn't lost because of bad luck or a snitch or a cold wife. He'd lost because of exactly who he was. And then I told him the thing I'd been saving, the only cruelty I allowed myself. I told him the company that had buried his true north, the one taking his trucks and his crews and his name in the dirt, was mine. I built it. With my mother's money and Curtis's hands. He set the phone down on the counter and just looked at me. And I watched the last little light go out of him, and I felt nothing I'd been afraid I'd feel. I hung up the phone on my side and walked out into the parking lot, and the sun was so bright I had to stand there a minute and just breathe. That was a few years back now. Curtis runs True North better every season, and he made me a proper partner with my name on the paper and everything, and a couple of times a year he and his wife come to Sunday dinner at my little brick house, and we don't talk about my ex-husband at all. My daughter lives close. My granddaughter calls the brick house Grand's Castle, which it is not, but I let her believe it. I never remarried. I don't expect I will. I find I like the particular quiet of a house where nobody is lying to me. I did one more thing with my mother's money, and it's the thing I'm proudest of. I started a small fund through my church for women my age who walk away from a marriage with nothing and no idea where to begin. Older women, the ones everybody assumes are too old to start over and too tired to fight. We help them find a lawyer who'll fight for the separate property they didn't know was theirs. We help them open an account in their own name for the first time in 40 years. I tell every single one of them the thing I had to learn standing in a gray hallway in my house shoes. A man who underestimates you has handed you the only weapon you'll ever need. People hear my story and they ask if all that money made me happy. It didn't, not by itself. Money is just a kind of power, and power on its own is a cold thing to hold. What made me happy was watching the truth come up out of the dark where he buried it, and walking out of that courthouse on my own 2 feet, and standing in the bright parking lot knowing I'd never again hand my whole heart to a man who'd already decided what it was worth. I earned that morning. I earned the quiet. And on a clear evening, when the wind comes up out of the west, the way it does on my mother's old land that's covered in solar panels now, catching the last of the light, I sit on my porch with my granddaughter and a glass of sweet tea, and I am, after all those years, exactly where I'm supposed to be. I used to think a long marriage was its own proof that I'd done something right. I learned, standing in that gray hallway in my house shoes, that 38 years can be a lie told slowly. My husband didn't fall because of bad luck. He fell because every single thing he did came back around to find him. He padded those insurance claims so the fraud unit had a file. He treated Maeve like furniture for 11 years, so when I finally asked, she'd already been waiting to hand me the truth. He cheated Curtis out of his own company, so there was a good man with cracked hands ready to help me build the thing that buried him. He called me dead weight, so he never once thought to watch me. Cause and effect. He planted every seed of his own ruin himself, and all I had to do was stop watering them and wait. What I want you to take from an old woman is this. The first thing that saved me wasn't the money, and it wasn't the cleverness. It was refusing to become him. I never lied to that court, not once, because the day you start cheating to beat a cheater is the day you've already lost yourself, and a win that costs you that isn't a win at all. Keep your hands clean, even when his are filthy. It matters more than you know. But staying decent isn't enough on its own. You have to think. The old me would have shoved that door open and screamed, and I'd have walked away with the car and a story everyone whispered about. Instead, I went cold and quiet, and I made myself add it up like arithmetic on a chalkboard. I learned what separate property meant. I learned where the real books were hidden. I let him believe I was a simple old fool because a man who underestimates you has handed you the only weapon you'll ever need. Use your head before you use your heart, especially when your heart is breaking. And then there's the part nobody warns you about, the part that nearly killed me. I had to carry foil-covered plates to that office and smile at the woman who'd been to my Thanksgiving table. I had to cook that man his supper and hold his hand while he lied to my face for months when every cell in my body wanted to throw the plate. That took something harder than smarts and steadier than anger. It took the kind of grit that lets you sit still in the dark and wait for the right morning. If you're in the middle of your own hard stretch right now, hear me. You are not too old, and you are not too tired, and the slow, quiet way through is not weakness. It is the strongest thing you will ever do. I'm 60-some years old, and I finally understand what my mother was really saving all those years on that wind-blown land. She wasn't saving foil and rubber bands, she was saving me a door out. Walk through it clean, walk through it smart, and walk through it on your own 2 feet.